Hi, we are Joel and Lauren Lowry, and this is our podcast, Wholehearted with the Lowrys. Our passion is to see people step into their destiny through discovering how good God really is and what it looks like to live in His love and purpose. We invite you to join us as we talk about life and leadership and how to live a wholehearted life. Welcome back to Wholehearted with the Lowrys. We are continuing our discussion on obstacles to intimacy. Last episode, we talked about selfishness and how that hinders our intimacy with others and how other people's selfishness hinders their intimacy with us. One thing that we often, whenever we talk about intimacy, a way to remember it is by saying, "Into me you see."
Yep. It's really about letting people see into your life. It's that vulnerable living that allows for connection. And the truth is, when we talk about vulnerability, we often hate vulnerability. And one of the reasons is, one of the definitions to vulnerability is to be open to attack. And who wants to be open to attack? And that's a reality. That's a part of vulnerability. I'm letting you in. And so you now have the ability to do whatever you want once you're inside. It's like, pull my heart out of my chest, hand it to you and say, here it is. You can either squeeze the life out of it or nurse it to life. And so we hate that. But the other part of vulnerability, though, is open to connection. And so it's impossible to be open to connection without being open to attack. And so vulnerability is really, really hard. It's kind of in the last probably decade been a buzzword. But it's really centered on humility. It's like, you can see into my life. I need you. I want to be connected to you. And I think it's huge. So today we're talking about self-reliance, and I'm quite the expert in living under self-reliance, and had a pretty negative impact on the early years of our marriage and our ability to love each other. And so I think one of the keys, or one of the difficult things about self-reliance, is that in Western culture, we prize it. It's like, especially for men, it's like you're supposed to be like, have it all together, not need anything from anybody. And that's what it really looks like to be a man. And the problem is that's actually rooted in pride. Not necessarily the arrogant sort of pride that gets all the attention, but it's rooted in pride that is often quiet and closed off, and it doesn't let people in. And so you can't have healthy relationships and be in self-reliance.
Right. And so oftentimes we grow up in homes with maybe fathers that are self-reliant. And as a little girl, you maybe feel like you want connection with your dad, and you want intimacy. You want to be able to see into each other's lives and to know each other, and for him to know your passions and your dreams and things that hurt you and things that make you come alive. But yet you're met with self-reliance, maybe with a dad that shows no emotion, communicates, I have no needs, and if I do have needs, I'll meet it myself. And so you can maybe feel as a child like you can't have access into your dad or your mom's heart, or maybe your grandparents, or maybe a coach or someone that you really looked up to. And it really can shape us in a way so that when we get to adulthood and we're married or we have close friends, we can't be intimate because that trust has been broken, because it's been communicated to us whenever you are vulnerable, that's not safe. And so I think this is a very important thing to address, so that we can have intimate relationships in our marriage, intimate relationships with our kids, and ultimately grow wholehearted, intimate families that then can multiply and grow more wholehearted, intimate families.
Yeah, and really impact the world with love. Like, that's
right.
Really the goal. I love what one of my friends, Leif Hetland, says. He says that spiritual maturity is not about how much you know, but about how comfortable you are with love. And I think that really is the deal. If the whole new covenant thing really is all about love, if the law of the new covenant is to love like God loves us, then it's like we want to replicate that, and self-reliance just doesn't really do it. It actually presents kind of a one-dimensional character instead of somebody that you can enter into life with. And so growing up, I really wrestled with self-reliance, and probably most people that wrestle with self-reliance really struggle with performance. And so for me, I was a performer, not an actor performer. Not so great at that. But as far as like performing and competing in life, that was it. Like I did well in sports and academics and church stuff. And I learned, I kind of created my identity, or a caricature of my identity, out of performance. And so people knew me based on what I could do instead of who I was. And at the core, honestly, I felt really alone. I felt like nobody knew me because what they knew about me was my performance. And yet I was celebrated for that. So the performance became a trap. It was like the performance-driven life, or the performance trap. And it really kept me stuck in life because I didn't want to tarnish that like reputation that I had built for myself in performance by entering into humility and vulnerability and letting people see that I really didn't have it all together. And so when we got married, that was kind of the deal going on for us, is that I thought, the truth is I wasn't pretending, I really thought that I had it all together and I didn't have problems. And that created some pretty unhealthy dynamics in our marriage.
Right. I felt like we were always working on me and on my problems. I would express a need or express just something that I was struggling with, and his antidote was always, let me figure out how to fix you. And so he would come to me with solutions, and I always felt like I was not heard or understood. And so then I would, submit to his leadership, and you would fix me. But I always felt like I could not have an effect on his heart. Yeah. Like, I knew he loved me, and I knew that I did have an effect on him, but I didn't feel like there was ever I knew he wasn't perfect, but I felt like there was no way into his heart, like to know, like, okay, well, what do you struggle? I struggle all the time. So what do you struggle with? There was no communication about what you were struggling with. So I had no idea how to comfort him or how to secure him, or I didn't feel like I had access into your heart.
Yep. And the truth is that I had a tough it out mentality. And so it wasn't that I was hiding from Lauren what I was struggling with. I was hiding from me, and therefore everybody else what I was struggling with. If something came up, I would tend to minimize. And minimizing is a favorite tool for the self-reliant. They'll minimize everybody's problems and try to fix them. They'll minimize their own problems. And so that's why self-reliance really does say, I don't have any problems, but if I do, I'll take care of it myself. And so it's really about not needing anything from anybody and trying to be a self-contained unit, and it just doesn't work. It's miserable. And so we entered a place in marriage where it was like the thing for me that set it off was I realized that I didn't have the capacity for empathy with Lauren. Like, when she was hurting, I would try to fix it, and I didn't know how to enter into that pain. And the truth is, in self-reliance, I had locked all of my pain up and never dealt with any of it. And so we've talked about this before, but my emotional bandwidth was really narrow. I didn't experience a lot of joy, and I didn't experience a lot of pain. And so I was really consistent, but I felt really suppressed and hollow at the same time. And so we went on that marriage intensive retreat we talked about, and I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm gonna have the humility to go all in and to get whatever I need to out of this, because this dynamic is not working. And that's the reality. If you're wrestling with self-reliance, one of two things happens. Sometimes they happen simultaneously. Either life piles up and the manure of life becomes the fertilizer for vulnerability and to break out of self-reliance, or you just choose humility and you say, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm going to stop trying to do this on my own, and I'm going to let people in. And the tricky thing about self-reliance is that it looks like humility because it's not exalting your neediness, but it's still self-centered. And so what humility is it's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less, right? So I realized I needed to deal with my own pain so that my joy could go up. And then what happens is that as you deal with your pain, because on that wavelength, joy is at the top and pain and sorrow or mourning that is at the bottom. So when you deal with one, you get access to the other. And then what happens is in relationships, it allows you at that same level to celebrate other people and then to empathize and mourn with other people. And so what I found is, hey, I had some stuff, difficult stuff in my life that I hadn't vocalized and let people enter into. And as I begin to do that, my capacity for love and for emotion greatly increased, and my need for self-reliance decreased. I still wrestle with self-reliance from time to time. Like even today, as we were getting set up for this podcast, I was running a bit late from dropping kids off. We've got some interns that I meet with once a week in the morning. And so I was like, you know what, I'm running late, and I should ask these guys to help set up. They know how to do it better than us. Shout out Alec and Aaron, you guys are awesome. And so I asked them for help, and that was actually really hard for me, right? Like, so these guys are interns, are supposed to be serving our leadership team and learning and growing, and they were there and available, and it was still hard for me to ask for help. And so one of the sure signs that you struggle with self-reliance is that asking for help is really, really hard. One of the ways to break it down is to humbly like face that difficulty of asking for help and let people in, let people serve you.
Yeah. One thing that as Joel's bandwidth started to stretch and him experience grief, the joy that he was experiencing, I actually was seeing the side of Joel that no one else knew. Yeah. That they knew Joel as this steady, consistent, but this like goofy, joyful side of Joel, I started to experience in the privacy of our relationship. And I felt so special, where I was like, I am like the one person that knows this side of him. And I started to fall in love with him all over again, because it was amazing to experience this person that I loved so much, that I knew was consistent and steady, but to experience just this, like we would just laugh together forever and cry together. And so we started to have emotions together, and it was this whole other side of our relationship that was blooming and blossoming that hadn't been there before.
Yeah, and I think part of it is in my journey out of self-reliance, I needed security for my emotions, to realize, hey, that my weakness isn't a liability, but that I can be weak and vulnerable and still have strength simultaneously, and be secure in that, and not feel like, oh, I don't have what it takes to be a man, or I don't measure up, or all of those fears that actually reinforce self-reliance. And so what Lauren did is in her love provided the security for me to really step out of that and to blossom into healthy connection.
And I think that is, for so many wives, the desire of our heart is to be that safe place for our husband, so that they can come alive and step into all that God created them to be. And so it was an amazing opportunity for me that God allowed me to just be that place for Joel.
Yeah.
So,
and I think there were some moments that because I just went through a real low as I was processing a lot of pain. And there were some moments probably that my weakness shook your security. But she chose to stay steady in that. She didn't nag, she didn't criticize. Instead, she let me process. And I think that's a really big thing, is to provide the space and the security for somebody coming out of self-reliance to process without trying to be fixed. Because what would happen in me is that it's like I know the solution, right? I've lived the solution-oriented way my whole life. And so if you started coming at me as I'm working out vulnerability and working out of self-reliance, if you come to me with solutions, I can say, hey, I got this figured out. I know what's going on. But that was a whole different like sphere of life, was the solution-oriented life. It was actually recognizing that wholehearted part of life that emotions live in, and learning how to live from that place.
Right. Yeah. So self-reliance is a huge hindrance to third base. If you've been journeying with us, we've been talking about relationship in the context of looking like a baseball diamond. And so first base is knowing and caring for someone. Our last episode, we talked about second base, which is serving and trusting. And so on third base is joint accomplishment, accomplishing things together. And so self-reliance really hinders the ability to accomplish something with someone, because if someone is operating in self-reliance, they communicate, I don't need you, I've got this on my own. And so there's really no teamwork there. And maybe you've been on a team with someone that is self-reliant, and you show up to serve and you show up to build something, and they've already taken care of all of it, and you really feel like you don't have a place. So So that can really hinder the ability to build with someone.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to be on a team that they're not needed on, right? And so what self-reliance says is, I don't really need you. And so if you want to build a good team, you need to not try to be the best at everything, but instead your role is to create space for others, which means you're not self-reliant and you're not trying to figure it all out on your own. You've got to let other people in and let them join you in it. And so I think that's a key thing for building healthy team, healthy connection inside a team.
I've even talked with volunteers from our church. I recently had a conversation, and a volunteer said, I often show up on a Sunday morning to serve in this area that I've committed to serve in, and it's already taken care of when I get there. And I just realized that whoever is setting that up before they get there and not letting them fulfill their role, there's likely some self-reliance going on. And I've even participated with that, where I don't trust that someone else is going to take care of it, and so I just do it. But really the breakdown then, where people have said, okay, I'm going to set aside time to volunteer and serve in this area, and then they don't get the opportunity to build and serve in that way because self-reliance has taken over.
And so self-reliance then becomes a lid on greatness, right? It's like if your whole success or your ability to live out what you're called, created to, your kingdom calling, if it all depends on you, then you're probably not going to get very far. But God puts you in the context of relationships, of family, spiritual family, that running together, you can accomplish way more than you ever could alone. In fact, it multiplies the ability to have impact as you add people to your team in a way that is working together. And so, but what often hinders that is self-reliance relies on pride and performance and what I know and what I can do. And so we create these lanes that we all run in that don't collaborate and connect together. Lanes are great, but they need to have overlap, that we're running and connected and we're doing things together. So we pull the strength out of everybody, we cover their weakness, and then we collaborate for greatness.
Right. Yeah. So what do we do whenever we start to recognize self-reliance in ourselves or others, or like what we touched on last time, selfishness in our kids? What do we do with self-reliance in our kids?
Yeah, I think a big piece in ourselves is that we choose vulnerability. We let people in. And you may just need to start with one or two people, but you start realizing, okay, this is what I'm struggling with. And you may even need to journal what you're wrestling with, and then make some intentional choices to let people in. One guy I was walking with who was struggling in an area of life, and I'm like, hey man, I'm not sure that you're going to realize how loved you are until you really blow it. And I think that's it for people, is providing the security for them. And I think that's what I needed, even as I was wrestling. It's like, hey, I'm not measuring up as a husband. I know it. I wouldn't have said it, but I'm like, I just needed a safe place to begin to heal and to grow in. And so I think that's really, a key in yourself, is finding that place where you can just be you and take the performance off, the masks off, and just really live in vulnerable communication.
Yeah. So I think whenever we see it in others, we were talking about this earlier, like, what do you do whenever you're married to someone who's operating in self-reliance, or have a friend, or you are on a team with someone who's operating in self-reliance? It is really hard to be in relationship with someone who's in self-reliance. And I don't know if there's much that you can do in order to change them, other than to just love them and be patient with them and pray.
Yep, and provide the security that they need, so that and consistency, so that when life gets tough, or they choose that place of vulnerability, that they can step out into it. But you're not going to be able to push somebody out of self-reliance, because they're a self-contained unit, and they're probably just going to shut you off. And so it's that consistency and that love and security, I think, that really does bridge the gap, so that at the right time, when they're ready, they have a place to go to. And a big thing is not being critical of them. If you're critical of them, it'll shut them down, and they're not going to open up with you. And then letting them begin to process. the truth is, having walked with some folks in self-reliance and you're struggling with self-reliance, one of the best things to do is to see a counselor and just begin to unpack life in a way that they're bound by law to not share with anybody. So you can just begin to be safe, and then you can live that out in your relationships also. Yeah. With kids, we've got a self-reliant one in our mix, and I think even at the age, it's probably just becoming more and more evident. And I think with her, what I've realized is the key is to be consistent and to provide security, and then to draw near when life gets tough, and then to just ask some questions. And what I've seen is that she'll open up, and my goal is not to fix that unless she wants some help, but just to listen and provide safety and security.
Yeah. And as a mom, it can be scary when you start to see selfishness or self-reliance or self-condemnation. Whenever you see these unhealthy things in your kids, for me, it makes me afraid, because I want to either control it or I want to fix it, and make them right, in my eyes. And so I think as a parent, it's really healthy to say, okay, I recognize this in my kid, and even in love and in connection, communicate even just your needs. Like, hey, whenever you shut down and you don't let me into your world, that the way that affects me is I feel disconnected from you, and I really want to know you intimately as your mom. I want to know what's going on inside your heart, and to ask questions. Have I done something to make you feel like you can't trust me with what's going on? Or did something happen in your life? Or to ask those questions. And if they're like, no, then you're like, okay, well, then let's work on connection. Will you let me into your world? And will you let me love you? And for kids, I think especially whenever they start to hit teenage years, there's all kinds of stuff going on inside that they don't recognize what's going on. But to just be that safe place, that whenever they do enter into that self-reliance, and part of that is, I think, even separating from your parents and becoming your own person even more, but not punishing them when they do operate in it, and saying, well, I guess they don't want relationship with me anyway. I guess I don't have access to their heart anyway. So
I'm just not about you.
I'm just going to let them go and do their own thing, but to continue to pursue their hearts and connection. And to be that safe place for whenever they do want to let down those walls, that they feel safe to come back in.
Yep, absolutely. One more thought on you dealing with self-reliance. If you're wrestling with self-reliance, one of the easiest ways to begin to break that is to ask for help and to receive help when it's offered, even if you think you could do it on your own, just to let people serve you. I shared that story, I think, in episode 2, where my buddy Io was asking if he could help carry the groceries. And on the third time, he said to me, Joel, if you don't let me serve you, you don't let me love you. And what he was confronting was that stone cold self-reliance. And that was really one of the things that began to break self-reliance in me, is that interaction with Io, and what...
Thank you, Io.
Yes. And what it did in me is I realized, man, I have created an island that I'm living on, and letting people serve you and help you, and asking for help is a huge part of breaking down that self-reliance.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us. We are loving just journeying along in this with you. And so we look forward to being back with you in our next episode.
Thanks.